Martin. Our topic is capitalism versus socialism, and we are open for questions.
All right, define the two for me.
Okay. So the dictionary definition of capitalism is any of the various economic and political theories advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. And then capitalism is an economic theory characterized by private or corporate ownership of capital goods, by investments that are determined by private decisions, and by prices, production, and the distribution of goods on the open market.
And what are we in this country? Capitalist, socialist?
We are mainly capitalist with some socialist policies.
Some?
Yeah.
Like?
Food stamps, public housing, Medicare, Medicaid, those are all socialist kind of welfare plans.
Why?
I'd say mainly Medicaid is more of a socialist policy compared to those because it's a redistribution of wealth. People are putting money in and it's going to the people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. And it's not just black and white when it's socialism and capitalism. There's a spectrum. Some countries are more economically free than others. We rank, I think, 24th in the world, but a few other nations are ranked ahead of us. Hong Kong is number 1, and Singapore is number 2.
On the Economic Freedom Index, the U.S. is number 12. And I'll also add to that, the 60s and 70s under Lyndon B. Johnson and the Great Societies when kind of the main socialist policies took place and they started.
Why do you think, you guys are young guys, why do you think we see uprising with millennials and socialist thoughts, and why do you think it's becoming so popular with the younger generation?
So Gallup conducted a poll and they found that 57% of Democrats held a favorable view of socialism. And between the ages of 18 and 29, 51% of millennials had positive feelings, while 45% had positive feelings of capitalism. I would say that these people have a positive view of socialism because they have not lived through the 1900s and seen the terrible things that have happened under Mao's Great Leap Forward and the Stalin's gulags and Cambodia's killing fields. They haven't seen the 100 million people, which is a low estimate of the 100 million deaths that have been caused by socialism.
I would say another reason is because of our current president. He's a very polarizing figure, and since he's more towards the capitalist infrastructure, a lot of the left-leaning people, the Democrats have moved very far left because of him, because he's so hated by the left compared to the other right-leaning presidents. They think, well, if his policies are bad, then we must go to the logical extreme. Is probably another reason why.
So do you think they have a lack of understanding? Do you think if they realized that many of the things that millennials enjoy, some of the things that they enjoy, like buying and their consumer habits, did you find anywhere in your research where they actually understand what happens to those types of things if they become social, if they follow the socialist values?
So I'm not familiar with these specific numbers, but there have been polls conducted specifically relating like Bernie Sanders and AOC's Green New Deal. They found that like people had a really high view of these policies before they found out they'd be taxed at 40 to 50 to 60% rates, and then after they found out that they'd be taxed at like these certain rates, then the favorability fell considerably.
So a lot of the young people that I talk to that are in favor of socialism refer to countries where socialism seems to be working. So maybe Scandinavian countries, Denmark for instance, which is not a true socialist state, but has a lot of socialist policies. So what's working in those countries, and is it truly a result of socialism, or is it more just the social constructs of their society?
Well, actually, those countries on the economic index freedom scale rank ahead of America, and since they've implemented those giant social nets, whether it's through health care or free education, has actually slowed down economic growth. And I forgot the specific name, but it's a Danish word for the party on lowering tax rates, because right now it's currently for people making above $60,000 a year, 60% in Denmark.
Yeah, so on the Economic Freedom Index, again, Denmark is 14, Netherlands is 13, Sweden is 19, and Switzerland is 4. And also, the Scandinavian countries obviously they're very capitalist. In 2015, the Danish Prime Minister came out and said, most Americans see us as a socialist state. We're not. We're a free market state. Also, one of the commonly cited countries now is Bolivia. I found out through my research. So people talk about Venezuela and their neighbors right next to each other. So they see Bolivia doing well as a sign that socialism can work, saying that Venezuela only was doing bad because of the U.S. sanctions on them. But Bolivia is much more lax on their enforcement of these socialist policies. Also, they export 45% natural gas, and they allow free markets through the many loopholes. So through price enforcement, most people can't buy these things, but there is a rampant black market. So in Venezuela this happened, but they didn't. In Venezuela, they crushed the black market. In Bolivia, they kind of let it flourish.
Why don't you get home from school and turn on the TV and see what's happening in Venezuela today?
I got a question there. So I've got some numbers and then it ends in a question, I promise. So as of right now, the 3 wealthiest Americans own more wealth than the bottom 50% of all American citizens. The richest 5% Americans own 2/3 of all the wealth. After inflation adjustment, the average member of Fortune 400 holds 10 times the personal wealth that he or she owned in 1982, and the separation, the polarization between the wealthy and the have-nots, so to speak, is only trending, in the opposite or in that same direction. There's only more separation. So the question is, do you think that phenomenon has something to do with younger people supporting socialism? And the second part of the question is this economic model sustainable and fixable?
So we have some. So I'd say the conversation should focus more on poverty and not income inequality, because income inequality in and of itself is not a bad thing. The top 10% of people in the United States pay 70% of the taxes, and capitalism is a sustainable economic. I have some numbers here. So from 1970 to 2006, the amount of people living in extreme poverty fell 80%, and that's in 36 years. From 1820 to 2011, the poverty rate fell from 94% to 17%. And so global poverty in 1981 was 63%. And then it fell to 17% in only 30 years. So I'd say the conversation should focus more on poverty and not income inequality. Also, to your point of like the top 3 people owning vast amounts of wealth, wealth in of itself is not a bad thing. I'd say greed is a bad thing, but wealth is not. Nothing. Their first dollar is not a moral. Their $1 billionth is not a moral. So it's not how you get the money. I'd say it's like what you think of it. I guess if that makes sense.
So an economic system within itself is not inherently moral or
I'm not.
immoral? Would you extend that to socialism too? Or?
No, I'm saying money in itself is not immoral. So the accumulation of wealth is not immoral, but placing that value of accumulating wealth over everything else is.
Well, like a good way to show that income inequality is not a problem is someone who makes $500,000 in America has more income inequality with Bill Gates than 2 homeless people. But I'm sure the first scenario is much more preferred. And some of the countries that are doing best economically have the most income inequality.
I've heard a lot about democratic socialism here recently. Can you guys tell me what that is and why that's become a word in our lexicon these days?
Democratic socialism is just regular socialism implemented through democratic means, so people voting on it.
So the same thing, different name?
Yes.
Okay. Why has it become such a big buzzword recently? If you'd asked me 5 years ago what that was, I would have told you I have no idea. I know what the 2 words mean, but I didn't know what it was as a combination.
Because the word democratic has a much more positive connotation in today's society than the word socialism. So when you pair the 2 together, it helps soften the connotative blow of just regular socialism.
So I state a bad thing in a good way?
Yes.
I'd say it's an oxymoron in and of itself because socialism almost always leads to totalitarianism.
Okay.
So I'd say it's hard to equate democracy with socialism.
Is one of the two systems more biblical? Is it more aligned with the biblical worldview?
So we can do Christianity or we can do morality. Do you want to do Christianity?
How about Christianity?
Okay. So socialism out of the gates violates 3 of the 10 commandments. So it violates the first commandment because it places government over God. We look to the government in order to provide us rights, our privileges, and to provide for us. We look to the government to give us food or whatever. We don't look to God for that. It also violates the 9th commandment, which is thou shalt not steal. The 19th century economist Frederick Bastiat just called it legalized plunder. And then it violates the 10th commandment because it says thou shalt not covet. Socialism pits 2 classes of people. In Marx's time, it was the proletariat and bourgeoisie against each other. And he said the proletariat should rise up and take from the bourgeoisie. So that's that.
Caleb, what do you think?
I agree with them. I think another aspect of reason I prefer capitalism over socialism in a biblical worldview is free will. Socialism is the top cramming down on the bottom through political power. When capitalism, if I want you to buy something, I have to make it appealing, and it's all done through free will transactions.
I'm interested in pushing back on.
Yeah, the commandments.
So let me get this straight. By your argument, the collection of taxes for the public good is theft.
I would say not the collection of taxes, but the collection of 90 to 100% of people's money. I'd say that is theft.
So it's the number that makes it theft.
I would
So what
say.
of the greatest commandment that we love one another? I mean, how do we reconcile the story of the Good Samaritan or Jesus healing the blind, pulling them out of poverty? How do we reconcile that with capitalism and saying we shouldn't provide for those people?
Okay, so capitalism is not saying you should provide for those people. It's saying you should do so out of free will. So Milton Friedman talks about this. He says whenever you try to do good with other people's money, which is what socialism is, you're committed to using force. And so this bad force always trumps good intentions. Also, he's saying you're doing good by yourself. You're not doing necessarily good for them. So, if that makes sense.
And I'd say every time when we've cut taxes on the top class, it has helped the people on the lower end of the spectrum.
Also, going back to the numbers, it's been proven that no other system of economics helps poor people more than capitalism.
Gentlemen, while we're quoting the Bible, let me jump in on the game. Acts 2:45, they sold property and possessions and gave to anyone who had need. Is that not socialism?
No, because it's free will. Socialism would force you to do that and hold you at gunpoint unless you did that. Capitalism is free will. So going back to what Milton Friedman said, if we're forcing you to do it, it's not out of the goodness of your heart, it's because you have to.
It's not a donation if I make you give it.
I'd also ask a follow-up question to that. So who's the they in the context of that verse?
The government.
In the
No,
context of the
in
verse.
the verse, they sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need.
And
Who is
who's-
it?
The church.
Who's the anyone who had the poor? The other members of the church.
Ananias and was it Sapphira exercised their free will and decided not to give the proceeds of their property to the poor, and they died. So was it really by free will, or was it by the commandment of God?
I don't think it was they died because they did not give. They died because they lied about it to Peter.
What did we tell you?
Peter knew because God told him. So they said they gave. And they said that this was the 10% of the money or whatever, and it really wasn't. So lying to God is a little different than not giving. So
Guys, we had a group yesterday, surprised me, I'd never heard Karl Marx quoted in a positive nature in one of these discussions, but it happened. I was here. But one of the questions that we asked that group is, where is motivation in a socialist society? Where is my personal motivation to achieve, to be, to grow, to expand, to gain in a socialist society if it's all dictated by the government?
There is none. If there's no profit incentive, then people will not work. That's been well demonstrated by the Laffer curve, which is the idea that if the relationship between tax revenue and tax rates, if you tax people at 0%, you won't collect any tax revenue. But if you tax them at 100%, people won't work because they won't get their own money. It'll just be given to the government. You'll end up collecting $0.
I would also like to add to that, socialism is founded on the belief that people are inherently good, while capitalism is founded on the belief that people are inherently bad. So socialism would assume that you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart for others. Capitalism is different because while let's assume you're working for greed, you still have to provide a good or service for others that they contractually will purchase.
Can I argue that though? If capitalism is assuming that people are inherently bad, donating or giving or helping the poor or the needy or the whatever in a capitalist society, it's not dictated by the government. So isn't that assuming that I'm good, and then out of that goodness I will then donate, give, contribute to charities, philanthropic activities?
I'm not saying, we're not saying
You just called me
America
bad, Samuel. I'm offended by that.
should not have any government restrictions. We're just saying that on the spectrum between capitalism and socialism, it would fare, everyone else would be better off if we were a lot closer to capitalism than socialism.
And even then, I'd say, like, even without the philanthropic giving, capitalism is still more effective at pulling people out of poverty just through the trade and free market enterprise. So it would still be more effective than socialism.
Stepping back a few sentences ago, you talked about distribution of money. So would you suggest that in order for socialism to work, that it has to be a more dictator type of situation?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, the key tenet of socialism is a centralized and planned economy in the government. So it doesn't really. Democratic socialism would be everybody has a say in everything, which has problems in of itself. So like
It'd be like the kids planning how class should be taught. That would really work.
Was Karl Marx an atheist or a Christian? Do you know?
I think he was an atheist, but I'm not positive. I'm assuming.
So let's circle back around to Venezuela. You guys know I did my master's thesis on Venezuela, and so I'm passionate about that. And it's failed, right? Socialism is a failed model there. Why did it fail?
I wouldn't say just socialism was the main reason that Venezuela failed, but another reason they failed is all the tariffs they put on imports. They try to practice independence theory, which is the idea that you don't accept any imports and become dependent on yourself to make all your own goods so you don't become dependent on other countries. So that it just ended up making the cost of producing goods a lot more for their citizens. And even though they were making it themselves, no one could really afford it, so eventually it collapsed on itself. And they also, since the government was planning it all, they put all their eggs in one basket and made, I think it was 97% of their market economy was in oil. And so their economy was dictated by the world price of oil.
Also, a main socialist talking point is that Venezuela fell because the U.S. placed sanctions on Venezuela, and I looked during my research. I found that Venezuela's economy and GDP were already tanking due to the falling oil prices, and then the U.S. placed sanctions on them, so it was not the U.S. caused their downfall; it was already happening.
So you think if Venezuela had not practiced the independent economic policies that they had, would they have been more successful? Or would they still have
Not
fallen?
much. They still would have failed, but it may have been taken a little longer.
I found some numbers. It said from 2002 to 2012, the government of Venezuela took over 1,168 private businesses and made them state-run. So I also say that at a large.
Samuel, you guys just stated that 97% of Venezuela's GDP was based on their oil exports, correct? And then, I'm sorry, and then the U.S. put sanctions on those exports of oil, right? And so but you said that did not cause the crash to their economy. However, isn't the U.S. a world leader in that when they put sanctions on, they expect that their partner countries, their allies, will follow suit with that, and so doesn't that increase the strain on an already fragile government in Venezuela?
It does, and once the U.S. put sanctions on them, their GDP fell drastically. But I was saying that before the U.S. put sanctions on them, their economy and GDP were already going down.
So it's not a cause, it's a contributing factor.
I would say it was a factor in the current state they're in, but a couple of years ago, when their economy was starting to go downhill, it was because of the falling oil prices, not because of the sanctions.
Guys, are there any examples of a country that's used socialist practices or has had a socialist government that's been successful?
I can